Captain, we have them! We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek podcast. Join Ken and crew each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock, where we're discussing the ultimate episodes of the second season of Prodigy. I'm Chief Engineer Ken Gagney.
And I'm First Officer Tiffany Bridge.
Tiffany, our ultimate episode.
I know, I'm feeling a little wistful, a little nostalgic, not gonna lie.
I know, we have another hour to go, so let's not rush it. We're gonna enjoy it. We're gonna enjoy all 20 episodes. We're gonna go back and we're gonna re-review every single episode of Prodigy. And then we're going to go start back at our 1966 debut of TOS and do all the episodes after that too.
Oh yeah, totally.
Have you ever seen the complete works of Shakespeare?
I have, yes.
Yes, they do all like 36 Shakespeare plays in 2 hours. The first hour is the first 35 plays and the second hour is Hamlet. Why can't we do the complete works of Gene Roddenberry abridged?
Precisely.
Right.
I think we can do it.
That's right. No, we can't. But we are here to talk about Prodigy, which just had the 2-part Ouroboros, parts 1 and 2, season 2, episodes 19 and 20. This is the season finale, and I have not heard word, correct me if I'm wrong, anything about a renewal for this series. Maybe there will be a third season, but I don't think we know that right now, do we?
I don't believe we do know that yet. I think Netflix is going to see how it performs.
Yeah, so this might be a season finale. It might be a series finale. And we'll be discussing that as we get to the end of the second episode. But let's start by talking about Ouroboros, where they are going back to the planet of Solum, and they are going to free Solum from Essentia and finally figure out a way to send the protostar back through the wormhole. Like, this is the culmination of 2 major plot threads this season, tying them all together, wrapping everything up, sending everybody home. What do you think?
You know, first of all, I thought these 2 episodes were great, action-filled, amazing. Also, they wound up all the questions that I had. I thought it was great. I enjoyed this start to finish. I laughed, I cried. I want to see it again and again.
Yeah, I laughed and cried. Probably more on the crying part, to be honest. There was one particular scene that I went back and rewatched today, and it hit me again. Thank you very much. But we'll get to that. I want to start with a couple of details right off the top, where at the very beginning, Dahl makes it a point of pulling his comm badge out of a chest. And he says something like, "We're going to need all the luck we can get." And I wondered why they were making a point of that. Like, is that a lucky comm badge? But we find out later. My own note to myself got answered later. I do want to point out also, when they finally are all equipped and they're ready to beam down to the planet, what does Rock say to them before they beam down?
Remind me.
Does she say good luck? Does she say go get him? Does she say be safe? No, she says love you.
Yeah, she does. You're right. I didn't write that down, but I do remember it now that you pointed out. And I remember thinking, like, oh, Rock, we love you too.
I think we don't often say those words to the people that we are not in romantic love with, because there are many different kinds of love. There's, the love
Sure.
of friendship, the love of family, there's brotherly love. And for some reason, I don't know if it's homophobia or what, or toxic masculinity, or both, which, they're closely correlated. We just don't say that a lot. And every time you part ways with somebody might be the last time you see that person. And it makes sense that this would want to be the last thing that Rock says to them.
Absolutely. And, for the record, I feel like this is a thing that more people should adopt is I just make it a point of telling my friends I love them more often, And I think sometimes it can be a little weird, right? Sometimes social dynamics can be a little weird. And so sometimes it's when I want it to not be weird, I'll say like, we love you, like on behalf of me and my spouse to make clear that this is like a friend kind of love. But like my besties and stuff, I say it to them all the time. I feel like none of us can ever hear it enough. And it's funny because I have this is not a thing that I say at work, right? Like I don't tell my coworkers this. Um, but except for the ones that become particularly close friends. But I do have a colleague who runs a weekly meeting, like a weekly sort of update meeting. And when he wraps it up, he always finishes it with, "Thanks, everybody. Love you. Goodbye." And we were talking about, like, should we still have this meeting? Should we reschedule it? And the person I was discussing with was like, well, yeah, but he always ends that meeting by telling us he loves us. And who doesn't want to hear that every week? I'm like,
Hmm.
well, then we should keep it just for that reason.
I could imagine some corporate environments where a remark like that would get you reported to HR.
Well, I mean, he's clearly doing it in a sort of jovial fashion, and he's addressing it to a group of people. So I think that
Ameliorates it.
removes the sort of HR necessity from that situation.
Sure. I get that. Yeah. So some of them beam down to the planet, and the rest stay on the protostar and or Voyager to try to deal with all these wormholes that Essentia has opened. Like she feels that her people are revolting against her, and that makes her hate her own fellow citizens, apparently. She doesn't care what happens to them. And so she just says, fine, damn the torpedoes full speed ahead. And she opens all the wormholes. And all those alien ships start lifting off to go attack every major point in the Federation, including, I believe, one of those wormholes was opening in Sector 001.
Yeah. So she is tearing holes in the fabric of space-time, doesn't care even a little bit. And meanwhile, Janeway is out here just having a great time, like firing like on all of the ships as she sees them. We love it. But she's going to run out of quantum torpedoes. There are, after all, a lot of ships.
And yet, these ships that she's firing on do not have drones, do not have shields.
That is true. That is true. They are less equipped
Yeah.
than the one she specifically sent after Voyager and the Protostar.
I feel like this is something of a common trope. I've seen it in the novel Mistborn. I saw it in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where the first big baddie of a certain type is hard to kill. And then once they kill one of them, all the rest fall much faster. And I feel like that's what happened here. Like the first one was a big threat, but once we demonstrated that Voyager could defeat one of them, it was no big deal to make Voyager defeat lots of them.
Sure. I think so. Well, and I also think that if we think about logistically, like how she's been building out all of these ships and how she's been controlling all of these ships, like it's just Dreadnought trying to control all these ships. And it doesn't seem like they have that many of them,
That many
right?
dreadnoughts or that many ships?
That many Dreadnoughts. And it also seems like maybe some of these ships were like sort of rushed to completion, like maybe they just didn't get their full complement of resources, because even though she's been using like Wesley's time powers to accelerate production of them, like there are still practical limits. The planet can only has so much metal, for example. And so I think, if you're thinking about like how to be a despot with like powers of over the space-time continuum, like nonetheless you can't create matter out of nothing. So you are still limited by the amount of resources the planet actually has to put towards your war machine.
That's true. I can see how these would be rushed. And if you are launching these surprise attacks against Federation outposts, I mean, granted, the attack on Voyager was also a surprise attack, but maybe she just didn't feel the need for shields. I mean, I guess you are going to prioritize your offensive capability.
Sure.
Yeah. But you're right. It was very satisfying to see Voyager just swooping in and out of all these enemy ships, taking them down one by one. Gotta love those quantum torpedoes.
Yes, indeed. The return of the quantum torpedo.
So while Janeway is firing these quantum torpedoes, we have Wesley, Zero, Rock, and Majel in some sort of an astrometrics lab trying to deduce the science and causalities and paradoxes of all these wormholes. I meant to go back and rewatch this scene because what they were saying did not land with me. I don't get it. You, Tiffany, did go back and rewatch this scene. Can you explain it to me?
Yes. So it's they spread this out over a couple of cuts in the action, right? Because while this is all going on, Hala Janeway is also being a little snippy with Chakotay and things like that. But interspersed with all of the action, we have a couple of scenes of the kids like thinking through the science problem of how do you figure out the wormhole. And it seems like the problem that they're having is that they can't figure out when it was that Chakotay sent the protostar back, right? And what they realized is when they really sit down and go through the timeline in years, right? They weren't even using star dates. They were using years, like Earth years, which was weird, but we'll go with it because it's a show for children. Um, when they really sat down and thought through all of the various wormholes, what they realized is that all of them had to do with the protostar itself, except for this one. And so they figured out, like, if they kind of overlaid the wormholes together, that it was all really just like all the wormholes were leading to the same place. And so they really just sort of needed they needed to sort of thread the needle through the wormholes to get them to the right place in time. But here's the critical part. I don't think any of the like space-time mumbo jumbo was the point of this scene. Like maybe Dr. Erin was very thorough in her explanation to the writers. But here's what landed for me about it. When they were explaining the timeline, they realized that it wasn't Chakotay who sent the protostar through at all. It was them all along. And that's why they couldn't figure it out, because they were looking for the date that Chakotay did it, and they didn't know when that was. But what they realize is, like, oh no, the actual time that the protostar goes back is now. It's today. Like, we can do this. And the reason that this was important is because it also solves the problem of why Gwen doesn't blink out of existence when they save Solon.
So I think I understood part of that the first time I saw it. The part being, oh, we don't need to know when it landed on Tars Lamora because it landed whenever we say it does because we're about to do it. But there's still that video footage that taken from the protostar's perspective of it lifting off the Tars Lamora of the future with Chakotay still being on the planet. Like that supposedly happened in some timeline that no longer exists. So,
Yeah, I think they call it they call it like closing the time loop, but I think of it as sort of like a time like loop-de-loop. Um, because like we see the protostar lifting off. We don't actually see what happens to the protostar after that. We just see it lifting off. Was Chakotay even successful? Right? I think if you start from the assumption that it was the kids all along who did it, who actually got the protostar to Tars Lamora, what that means is because like what I didn't understand was I have been working under the assumption all this time that because Essentia told us that that Solum had its civil war because of first contact with Chakotay. That's not what happened. When Chakotay found Solum, it had already been destroyed by the Civil War. Who started the Civil War? Essentia started the Civil War. And of course, she says it's because of first, and of course, she's going to say it's because of first contact. But it's Essentia who started the Civil War. It was Essentia's Civil War. So we still have the Civil War on Solum. We still have the protostar landing in Tars Lamora. And like Wesley says, it doesn't matter about the little stuff. What matters is that the big stuff still happens. So yes, they did sort of change the overall timeline a little bit, but they still hit the high points. I think that's what they're trying to say.
so what about the diviner?
So the timeline in which he was the diviner did exist, but it like this is kind of what I mean by like a time loop to loop, right? Like the timeline kind of like doubles back on itself a little bit and doesn't quite meet, but it continues.
So I think what they're saying is, in some ways, it's okay to change the future, even if the future is your past, as long as you don't change the past.
Right. That's kind of what I think that's kind of what they're getting at. Is like, look, we need it to get we need the important part of the protostar's history is that it's on Tars Lamora when the kids find it. The important part of the protostar's history is not who sent it there on what day.
Right. Okay.
Because yes, the diviner is doesn't become the diviner, right? Like Iltheron never becomes the diviner. But he still like presumably goes on to have a daughter named Gwendala.
Oh, that's weird. Now, see, some of the paradoxes that you and I are trying to resolve are, in my opinion, paradoxes that the show never raised. Like, it
That's
never
true.
asked, hey, if the diviner never exists, how does Gwendala? So, if this is not a problem they were trying to solve, of course they didn't give us a solution because it's not a problem to begin with, except in our headcanon.
Maybe. But I mean, it's still it's still a weird like causality loop.
Yes, yes, it's not necessarily consistent, but science fiction, when you reach 900 episodes of a show,
Yeah.
it's a little hard. I mean, this is one of the reasons why DC Comics did Crisis on Infinite Earths, because they had 60 years almost of history, and their own stories were running into each other. And so they had to reset. And
Yeah.
so, sure, if you want to say time mechanics work this way in Next Generation, but this way in Prodigy, I'm going to acknowledge it, but I'm not going to complain about it.
Yeah, I don't want to get too I mean we've talked about this before. I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but like it just did always feel weird to me that like that changing the timeline in that particular way wasn't going to interfere with Gwen's existence. But um I don't know. Gwen still exists because the time loop requires her to exist.
That's right.
Because none of this would have happened without her.
That's right.
So the
She's
ultimate
our
plot armor.
she's a she's a weight-bearing pillar.
Yes,
That's right.
she is.
So there was a lot of action as they tried to scale or ascend the communications array that is generating the wormhole. There was a very Back to the Future moment where,
Yes.
yes, oh no, we have to conduct this electricity and the cord has come undone and we have seconds to make it connect again. Somebody has to get up there and take one for the team.
Yeah, I looked at I was like, oh my God, they're really doing the Hill Valley Clock Tower.
Yeah,
And they did. And it's funny because I appreciated the way they just put it there for anyone to recognize, but they didn't go out of their way to kind of hang a sign on it. Right? They're like, look, you kids watching this movie, you kids, you don't know this one yet, but your parents are gonna love it.
right. Yeah, it would have been a little too obvious if Dahl had said, "Great Scott."
Right. Right.
And of
But
course and Jack and Pog said we have 90 seconds to do this, and it took a lot longer than 90 seconds because we needed that much drama.
we needed that much drama. But when he was like, well, if we connect it just in time to we have to connect it at just the right time. I'm like, oh my God, jumping gigawatts. They are absolutely doing this.
How did
I was so excited.
nobody know how to pronounce gigawatts? Nobody on the set of that show knew how to pronounce gigawatts.
Doesn't matter. Go with it. It's alliterative.
Is it?
Jumping gigawatts? Sure it is.
Who said that? Did he say jumping gigawatts?
Yes, he
I don't,
absolutely did.
I don't remember that line.
No, not Jankum. I'm talking about Christopher Lloyd.
Oh, I know who you're talking about,
Okay.
but I still don't remember him saying that.
Yeah, he did.
All right. I'll take your word for it.
Also, I really enjoyed the millicochran as a unit of temporal variance.
I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. Thank you for clarifying that. I think they've used that in other Star Trek. I don't think it's
I think they
original here.
probably have, but I've never really noticed it before. And I enjoyed that.
Yes, Cochrane as a unit was first used in TNG. There we go.
That makes sense. I would
Uh,
definitely not have noticed it the first time I watched TNG.
do you know how much a milli Cochrane is?
How much is a millicochran? Why don't you tell me?
It's 0.001 Cochrane's.
Ken, you're killing me, Ken.
I'm not wrong. Not wrong. Greek roots, I tell you. All right. So we saw Dahl do Doc Brown and he connected the thing. He took one for the team.
Yep.
Meanwhile, he's doing this while Dreadnought is also attacking the people behind him, including, most especially, Murph.
Murph. And here's where I felt like we had another movie reference that was a little more subtle. Because, the Dreadnought's about to shoot Dal, but then Murph wrestles it off the side of the spire and rides it down like the ending of Doctor Strangelove.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Like all he needed was a cowboy hat, and it would have been like the end of Doctor Strangelove, which is a classic movie and a particular favorite of mine. So I noticed it right away. Um, but then you're worried that Murph is like, you have this moment where you're worried that Murph did not survive, and then he just like crawls up with the Dreadnought's head. Amazing.
And of course, Dreadnought's head appears first, making you think that Dreadnought survived.
Right.
But there were two minor clues that kind of spoiled that moment for me, or rather, did not spoiled it, but it didn't have the impact that I think maybe the writers were going for. One was the music was not that of a villain emerging from the pit. And second of all, there was only the briefest of moments where you could only see the head before you realized the head had no neck.
Hmm.
You're like, oh, if the head has no neck, then he's not alive.
Yeah, I didn't really think of it as you were supposed to think that it was the Dreadnought emerging, because like you said, that moment didn't go on long enough for you to really like get that sort of slow sense of intimidation. Like, no, that's just Murph climbing his way up out of the whatever it is that he fell into. Like that was almost as good as pew 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 from last time.
Why do you think he saved the head?
I mean, why not? You don't think Murph wants to take a trophy?
I didn't have him for the type.
I mean, it's not like I mean, it's a dreadnought. It's not like a sentient being. It's not like he
It's,
took Data's head.
wow, we went there.
Yeah, I sure
We,
did.
total time zero. All right, fine. And of course, Murph pulls out of the pit just in time to save Dahl from falling again for like the third time this season.
Yeah. Look, it's helpful when when you've got a comrade made of like stretchy stuff.
When your teammate is Mr. Fantastic.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
if Murph doesn't get recruited into the MCU by Nick Fury, I don't know what the point of any of this is.
Yeah, what are we even doing here?
Right. Just a waste of time. And that's not the only showdown we had. We also had Essentia fighting Gwendala, which actually disappointed me a little bit because who I wanted to see fighting Essentia was Essentia.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there are tons of sci-fi stories where uh, I'm drawing a blank on the name right now. Looper. That's the name of the movie with Bruce Willis.
Hmm.
And also season one of The Flash TV show, where the way you defeat a villain from the future is by altering the present so that they can never exist. And I would not have minded seeing something like that. Maybe not something that dark, because the examples I just gave did not end well for certain heroes, but it still would have been neat to see older and younger versions of themselves fight. We saw it in Avengers Endgame with Captain America. We saw it in season 5 of Lower Decks with Michael Burnham and the Time Bug. So why not Essentia on Essentia action?
Yeah, I mean, I can see your point there. I felt like because I kind of asked that question to him, like, where's young Essentia and all this? But I also feel like, Gwen had something like she didn't get to finish her last fight with Essentia. And partially that was because she was trying not to have it, right? She was just like, look, I'm not really here to fight you. Let me just get up out of this pit. And then she started glitching. Um, but I think this was really like Essentia wanted to take on Gwen, and Gwen really needed to be like this was a little bit of an emotional loop for Gwen to close.
Hmm.
And as the fight goes on, like Gwen's losing, and she's making a real fight out of it, and she's doing everything she can, but it isn't really until the other Valnakat arrive that she's able to sort of turn the tide. And I thought that was important too, to show like how, you know, Gwen, who didn't grow up on Solum and had never been to Solum before this particular adventure, um, was really kind of accepted as one of them. And that because that was a like an emotional beat too, is that, am I even the right person to be doing this? I didn't grow up here. Are these really even my people? And they're like, yes, Gwen, you are one of our people, and you are with us in our fight, and we are with you. I think it was a really profound moment.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're completely right. She was cast by Essentia as the villain. Like she is an outsider. She's not of this world. And in the end, her countrymen threw in with her. That's pretty awesome.
Yes.
Although they did so using a technique that I was not aware that this race had.
Yeah, I mean, well, here's the thing. Like, we haven't really gotten to learn that much about the Valnakat, right? We haven't had time. We've been fighting with them or hiding from them the whole time. I feel like there's a lot more we could learn about them.
So what does it mean? My will is yours.
I mean, I take that to be some sort of like telepathic connection. We have known for a while that the Valnakat are able to control their heirlooms with the force of their will. And so the idea that they could join their wills together to exert a particularly um, to sort of give it some more oomph makes sense.
So does that mean the people who are giving Gwendala their will have less of it in that moment? Like they can't control heirlooms?
I mean, it seems like their attention is kind of focused.
And is there a limit to how much will Gwendala can have?
I mean, these are all excellent questions for season three.
And what exactly happened to Essentia? She tried really hard to pull that heirloom back. Did she just think too hard and she blew her brain out?
I mean, it did seem like she injured herself in some way, right? Like when
Yeah.
you overdo it at the gym, try to lift too much weight.
But can you imagine if that worked with mental capacity? Like you try to solve too hard a math problem and you're just like smoke comes out your ears.
I mean, too much stress does impact brain health. So,
True, but not in as pronounced and visible a fashion as we saw in this show.
I mean, not usually.
Right,
But not as usually and as immediately.
right. Immediately, maybe that's the better word. Like she stopped mid-sentence, she fell to her knees. The white glowy stuff in her head turned black. Her eyes dilated. There was a lot going on there.
I don't know if this is like a Valnicott version of a stroke.
Oh,
Yeah.
in which case I feel bad for her.
Well, I mean, her cognitive abilities seem to be mostly intact, other like her ordinary ones, right? Because she is perfectly capable of recognizing what happens next.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the next episode, she does say, "What have I done?" Which it seemed like when she threw open all those wormholes, she was quite clear about what she was doing, and she didn't give a damn.
Yeah, but that wasn't what she was reacting to. She wasn't reacting to the holes in space-time. She was reacting to the loom finding them.
And I guess she wasn't thinking of that in the first episode.
Yeah, I think she probably wasn't thinking too hard about the loom.
But different means to the same end. Either the rifts in space-time consume the planet, or the loom do. Why does she care more about one than the other?
I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
now that her like now that her like telekinetic abilities have been at least temporarily fried, she's got a little more moral clarity.
It does seem like there have been a couple of times in fiction where when somebody just lets go of their anger, they're able to see things more clearly. I guess that's probably true in real life too. You don't need to look at fiction for that. But yeah. One last thing I want to say about this episode was there were some weird commercial breaks. Like the
Yes.
timing of them was off. Like there was one moment where they're in astrometrics with Wesley, and Wesley says, "Don't close your minds, open them." And it cut to a commercial break. Or there was also a moment when Gwendala and Asensia were fighting. I don't remember the exact choreography of that moment, but it was like I think Asensia kicked Gwen and it went to a commercial break, like right in the middle of the fight. It was weird how they interrupted these scenes.
Yes. I didn't notice that as much because I think we have the no ads tier of Netflix, so I just got like a fade to black and then it immediately fade back in.
Wait, there's an ads version of Netflix?
Yeah, I assume that's what you meant.
Well, I mean,
There's
this
an ad
show,
supported tier of Netflix.
I didn't know there was an ad-supported tier of Netflix.
There is.
I mean, I knew that was true on, oh, you're right. I didn't know that. Okay. I mean, this show was originally written for Paramount Plus.
Hmm.
Like, it was pretty much done when Paramount canceled it. Paramount has ads. I remember watching Star Trek Discovery with somebody, and she was like, why are they fading to black? There are no commercials. I was like, well, that's because I'm paying for there to not be commercials. She's like,
Right.
oh, I had no idea. So I just assumed that this was a Netflix show that was, you know, edited for Paramount Plus. So the fact that there were commercial breaks, even though I wasn't seeing the commercials,
Mhm.
never struck me as odd. But now I know that there actually are Netflix with ads. Huh,
Yes.
how about
Yes,
that?
indeed.
But that doesn't excuse why out of 20 episodes this season, only one of them had weird timing for the breaks. That's all.
Yeah, I think the thing about this episode is the act breaks do kind of fall in weird places in these two episodes. Um, and I'm not sure. I think that's just sort of how the shape of the story shook out.
Hmm. And then we go to Ouroboros Part 2, unless you have anything I've overlooked. Okay. I want to start by saying Ouroboros Part 2 sort of inverted the typical structure of an episode of Star Trek or almost anything else. Usually there's like an opening act and it builds up to something like some sort of a conflict that they resolve. And then there's sort of like a little epilogue. And
Hmm.
this episode, taken on its own, although it is part two of two, was the opposite. There's a big action sequence at the beginning, and then they resolve it in the middle, and then there's more conflict at the end. It was just the opposite of the bell curve we usually have.
Yes. I thought it was, I went when I was going back and rewatching scenes, I did take note that like the the point at which it becomes clear that they have succeeded in the overarching goal of the season is at like 6.5 minutes into this episode, right? And then by like 9 minutes, Dal is setting his comm badge down, which we'll get to. And then the rest of it is like denouement and then setting up a potential season three, which I thought was an interesting choice.
An interesting choice.
Sure. I mean, clearly these two episodes are meant to be taken together. They're it's a two-parter.
Yep.
And so I think the structure makes a little bit more sense if you think of it as an hour rather than as 30 minutes. But yes, I did think it was an interesting choice to sort of to structure things that way where you get this sort of like nice like break and downtime in the middle where they're
Yes.
just like kicking it at Starfleet Academy and they turn out to be like kind of famous.
Yeah. But there's a lot that happens before they get there.
Yes.
We see Wesley on the bridge with Dahl, and Dahl's like, "Oh, this is why you wanted the seven of us to stay together." Which, like Wesley had said in the previous episode or two, like, "Oh, you're all supposed to be together when you rescue me. That's why you have to stay together." And now he's sort of retconning that and saying, "Oh no, the reason you all need to stay together hasn't happened yet. It's for great and terrible things like the Wizard of Oz."
Yeah. I wondered about that too. I'm like, no, but Wesley, you did specifically say they had to stay together in order to save the universe.
Right. And maybe he meant, oh, you're going to save the universe again. You need
Sure,
to all be together for that.
sure.
It also reminded me of All Good Things, the finale to The Next Generation, where Q says to Picard, like, oh, there are some amazing things coming for you, like things that you won't believe. You're going to play a very important role. And Q goes to whisper in Picard's ear, and then he pulls back and he's like, that'd be telling. It's kind of the same thing here, where like Wesley knows something about our characters and how important they are that he's not telling us or the audience. And
Yes.
I've seen it before. It's fine, but I kind of feel like even if the kids were not destined for greater things, I almost feel like in some way that's not too important. But nonetheless, it diminishes the importance of what they're doing now. Because Wesley's kind of saying, oh, you think this is important? Like making sure your entire timeline doesn't unravel? That's nothing compared to what's next.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, I kind of thought what they were all doing these last 20 episodes were important.
Yeah. Well, and also like, oh, bigger than this, can I get a nap and a sandwich, please, before we start thinking about that?
Right? Everything is so big all the time. But this moment in the Prodigy finale is what I went back and rewatched today. This is the moment that really tugged at my heartstrings, where it's the moment when Voyager, where the Protostar is now on autopilot. Everybody is being
Yes.
back to Voyager. And Voyager pulls away from the Protostar while the Protostar continues its path down the wormhole, back into the past, to its destiny, to its fate. And we see all this lovely montage of both seasons of Prodigy, seasons 1 and 2. And we have these very meaningful lines, again, pulled from both seasons. Some we just heard like an episode or two ago,
Sure.
episode 18 specifically of season 2. And some go all the way back to Hologram Janeway being activated for the very first time. And I have to wonder, like in the second season, were they saying these lines knowing how meaningful they would be in a different context? Like, were they being set up for that? But it doesn't matter because I love this highlight of both the good and the bad. Like, the
Hmm.
diviner was in there, and Gwyndala was saying, you made your choice, father. It wasn't all friends becoming friends. And it kind of reminds me of the finale of DS9 when they're all in Vic Fontaine's bar, and there is a montage showing all the characters except for Jadzia Dax. Not that I'm bitter about that. And it goes back to this trope or this idea that when you die, your life flashes before your eyes. And this might be, just like DS9, the finale for Prodigy. And we saw Prodigy's life flash before its eyes. And the
Yes.
soundtrack that they set it to was amazing. It was so powerful. And I want to buy the OST just for that one track.
Sure.
Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I really
Yeah,
loved.
it was really beautiful and stirring, especially after we just found out that Hollow Janeway got backed up to the EMH backup module, so she doesn't get left behind this time.
So the version of Janeway from season 1 is still dead.
Sure, yes. That specific Janeway.
Right. I did find it interesting that this hologram Janeway, she's like, "Oh, you made a backup of me. Great. Computer, reset hologram." I'm like, "Okay, just because you've been cloned doesn't diminish your own consciousness. You still basically just committed suicide by asking the computer to reset yourself."
Here's the thing. I feel like the rules are different for synthetic life forms that can be backed up. I feel like the rules are just different for them. It's not like it would be cloning a human. I just don't think it's I don't think, I think it would, I think for, in this context, it's more like Takeshi Kovacs in Altered Carbon.
I've read the book. I didn't see the TV show.
Well, the reading the book is enough.
I suppose he made a backup of himself too, didn't he?
Well, that's the whole point of that's the whole like premise of the universe, right? Is that human consciousness can be
Can be
transferred
transferred.
from one place to another, and then it's considered still you. And that's why there's only allowed to ever be one copy active at a time.
Right, right. But do you think the backup that the doctor made included every moment up until she said reset hologram? Like it probably didn't have that
I,
last moment.
I well, I mean, that very last few seconds where she said, "Oh, okay, erase hologram." Like, yes, she's gonna wake up on Voyager without remembering having done that specific thing.
Right.
But that's all that's lost.
Right. So it is a fork of Janeway.
Technically, yes.
Okay. I'm glad we're clear on that.
They forked Janeway.
Oh, don't put it like that. It was sort of in a way intimate the way she and Chakotay were holding hands at the end.
Hmm. And they spent a lot of time together, just the two of them.
10 years. Yeah.
Hmm.
So one of the questions I raised to you in an earlier episode of this podcast was, is this the point of this entire season to fix the mistake Dahl made by launching the Infinity into the wormhole too soon and disrupting the original timeline? And I thought if that is what this episode is, what this season is about, then there has to be a reason for that. They have to somehow end up better than they would have had he not done that. But if I understood your explanation of that astrometric science scene correctly, then the original timeline that Dahl screwed up by launching the Infinity too soon never existed.
And I don't think that's what I'm saying. I think that's kind of what I mean about like the timeline sort of looping back on itself. The timeline that involved Chakotay launching the protostar and the timeline that involved Dal and the kids screwing up the launch of that launch of the protostar. Um, both of those tracks exist. Both of those moments exist. Like if you think of like a roller coaster and when it comes back around and the tracks are next to each other for a moment. Like I think the both of those versions of the timeline still exists because they're all part of the loop.
But that means that one of the consequences of Dahl launching the Infinity too soon is that Chakotay got stranded on that island for 10 years. Like, nobody seems to acknowledge that Dahl just cost Chakotay 10 years of his life.
Okay, but like Chakotay got on the ship and took it, right? Like because he was lost before they did that. Like when he was already did he I think he didn't he die originally in the timeline?
We don't know. I mean, the kids found the ship on Tars Lamora, and its visual record showed Chakotay launching it. Now they have to put the ship back on Tars Lamora exactly as they found it, but there's no visual record of that happening because now it never happened.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is in the version of the timeline where Chakotay launches the ship without being on it, what
Did he
happens to
die?
Chakotay? He died.
Well, did he? Because they were going to the future to rescue him.
They were going to the future to find out if he was dead or not, and then rescue him, hopefully.
Hopefully.
My point is, we don't know that he actually did he steal 10 years of Chakotay's life, or did he give Chakotay back the rest of his life?
But how would we have known if he had died? Hmm. I don't know. It's still confusing.
Well, and I think that's why Starfleet was yelling at Janeway this whole time to come home.
Risk is too great.
He's probably dead. Get out of there.
Them putting the protostar back the way they found it also remind me a little bit of this NBC TV series called Timeless. Have you seen it?
I think so.
It ran for 2 seasons. It was going to run longer. It got canceled. But it basically starts off the first episode with this villain showing up and spoiler, going to the protagonist and saying, 5 years ago, or no, a version of you from 5 years in the future came to me and set me on this path. And they thought the show would run for like 5 years, and we get to see that, but the show got canceled after 2 years. But they had the opportunity to do a finale episode and wrap everything up. And so after just 2 years, like everything got tied up. The heroes retired, they got married, they had kids, jobs, families, whatever. It was all happy, all hunky dory. But then, like, they fast forward 3 years into this happy life, and they're like, okay, it's been 5 years since this thing started. We need to make one more time travel trip into 5 years in the past and set this villain on this path, or else none of this will have happened.
Right.
And they basically do the same thing here, where they go 5 years into the past. We see the villain for chronologically the first time, and then there's like a fast forward through everything else that happened after that because they have started that chain reaction now. Makes me wonder when season one, episode one of Prodigy came out, and Rock finds that comm badge on Protostar's bridge and she touches it. What did the writers think that comm badge had come from? Like, why did they think it was there? Was it just convenient, or did they actually think we're going to do a time travel thing and have Dahl put it there?
I mean, I think it is possible that the overall arc of the second season was on their mind when they were breaking the first season. Like, I don't think that's unlikely at all, right?
Hmm.
Because they're developing this show for Paramount, the home of Star Trek, as they like to say. Um, and I don't think they had any reason to think that they might not get a season two at that time, right? Because at that point, remember, like at the point that they would have like signed the contract to make this show, streamers were just throwing money at creators to make things, and they're like, "We're doing Star Trek, like, yeah, we're gonna get a second season to finish this story." So I think it is possible that this was the plan all along.
I could see that. Yeah. I do wonder if they went back and changed any of season two once they found out they were canceled from Paramount.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question.
Hmm.
But like we have this like great, very stirring montage, right? Like it was a very emotional moment, and then we get all of this great like resolution, right? The kids are at Starfleet Academy. Janeway's making official first contact with Solom, um, and Wesley visits his mom.
You do remember I called that.
Yes, you did. I saw it happen. And I thought this is another thing Ken was right about.
And I specifically said that he was going to meet his brother.
You did specifically say that. I remembered that too. Though here's the thing. Here's my question about this situation. The impression that I got from Picard season 3 is that basically as soon as Beverly Crusher realized she was pregnant, or shortly after the baby was born, she like cut everybody off, stopped talking to everybody, didn't want anybody to know, lest they tell Jean-Luc Picard that he had a son, right? But she's still here at Starfleet Medical, like reachable, kicking it with a baby who is old enough to say, "Hi, what's your name?" when Wesley walks in the door. And so, like, how did she think she was keeping that from Picard?
Was she at Starfleet Medical?
I mean, she was clearly in touch with somebody at Starfleet Medical because they were able to track her down when Janeway was looking for her, even though the senior staff of the Enterprise D hadn't been able to do that.
But you do remember that she was not easy to get a hold of, and you and I debated whether or not this is what sent her underground.
I mean, it clearly didn't because she's still there. Um, though I guess
Well,
it hasn't been all that. She could be packing her bags while Wesley's showing up, but
and also I think no matter where she is, a traveler could find her.
that's probably true. That's
Hmm.
probably, but I don't. But that wasn't like the point. Wasn't that Wesley was able to find her? She was using a Starfleet pad to communicate with. Like he called her on her work phone.
Well, what do you want? Have we ever seen people not use Starfleet pads? I mean, she's still a citizen of the United Federation of Planets.
Yeah, but it was distinctly a Starfleet logo, not a Federation logo
Hmm.
on that pad.
Well, I think we're gonna have to wait until the fanfic comes out and resolves this for us.
Yeah, I mean, this is the space where fanfic dwells. My point is, I thought she had gone. Um, if the point was to hide Jack and make sure nobody knew he was Picard's son, she probably should have cut and run a little earlier than this.
Possibly, yes. But
because like currently her life is full of people who could say, "Oh yeah, I talked to Beverly last week. Did you know she has a baby?"
Sure, like you do. Well, don't you keep up with nextdoor.com? It was posted. Come on.
She posted on Facebook.
Right. I guess it would be
People
like
can,
next ship or something.
yeah,
I don't know. We also got to see, speaking of returning doctors, we got to see Dr. Aaron McDonald.
we sure did.
Throw out your Temporal 101 books.
Yes,
Because now we're moving to Temporal 201.
yes.
Love it. But yeah, like you said, the kids are at Starfleet. They're famous, which is nice. And Janeway retired to a little place in Indiana, which made me wonder because in season 3 of Picard, which is set like 10 to 15 years after this, she's still in Starfleet. We don't see her in season 3 of Picard, but Jean-Luc is trying to get a hold of her. Like, we need to talk to Admiral Janeway, which you wouldn't say if she was retired. But then we get an explanation for that because just like in the short track, I think it may have been called Children of Mars, this is the moment when synthetic life forms, not holograms, just synthetic life forms, go rogue and destroy the Utopia Planitia shipyards, and the Romulan evacuation effort is abandoned.
Yes.
Which, the timing wise, makes sense, but was also, I felt a little bit like the kids did. Like they said, we worked so hard to get here. Now it's all going up in flames. I was like, yeah, this is dark. Why did you have to go and throw that in there?
You know, I was thinking about that, but I think this is another example of this show like asserting itself as part of the canon,
Hmm.
right? Like yes, we are a canon show. Everything that's happening here should be understood in relationship to all the other shows. Our characters were impacted by the Utopia Planitia attack. Um, and they are going to, and if they get sent out, if they get a season 3 and they're sent out to do exploration, and we don't see a lot of other Starfleet ships while they're doing that, like this is why. It's because they're being sent out on this particular mission. And Janeway is going to be supervising it.
I was
Um,
surprised that she had more sway in that matter than Jean-Luc did, because he said, if you abandon the Romulan evacuation effort, I resign. They're like, okay, we accept your resignation. He's like, oh, crap, you called my bluff. Okay. And Janeway, she didn't push for something that significant, but she still got the new Protostar class ship designated as what she call it, like a pilot program for training cadets.
yeah, the way they explain that is that the new protostar, which is called the USS Prodigy, by the way, um, yes,
I didn't
that's the
notice
name of the
that.
ship of the new
Okay,
protostar class ship.
nice.
The Prodigy was about to be decommissioned because they decided that that class of ship was not suitable for home, sort of home territory protection. It was really only suitable for exploration. Well, we're not going to be doing any of that, so let's just, mothball it. We'll send it to Geordi at the Fleet Museum. Maybe he's not at the Fleet Museum yet, but he will be. Um, and so really all she was asking for was a ship they weren't going to use anyway. Whereas Picard was trying to evacuate an entire planet full of people.
Hmm.
And how many ships was that going to take? Like all of the ships that they were going to do that with were destroyed at Utopia Planitia.
Hmm.
So he wasn't asking like he was asking for something they didn't have a way to give him or that they weren't willing to devote the last of their scarce resources to. Whereas she's just asking for something they were going to stick in a closet.
That's a good point.
She's like, "Oh, you've got a spare coat, you're not using it. Can I just borrow that?"
But first, she gives all the kids a little wooden chest, and they open it, and what's inside but street corn?
Pips. Oh my God, we get pips. That was very sweet. I thought it was a very sweet moment.
And this also reinforces a distinction that our artist for this podcast, Allison, pointed out to me fairly recently, which I've already talked to you about on this podcast, which is that somebody's rank and their job are not the same thing. Because at the end of this episode, we finally see all the kids in like more recognizable Starfleet uniforms. Like Jankum Pog is in engineering yellow, which is awesome. And nonetheless, like the captain, the first officer, the chief engineer, everybody, they're all cadets. They're all equal rank. They have different jobs, but they're all just cadets, like a whole ship of cadets.
Well, I mean, technically, field commissioned as ensigns. So
That's right. I'm sorry. I'm using the wrong word. They are all
that's
ensigns,
right.
but still, that's what they are, is they are all ensigns, a whole ship of
Sure.
ensigns.
Right. Exactly. I mean, again, invoking the Narada incursion, the Kelvin timeline,
Right.
right?
Yep.
I mean, Kirk becomes captain of the Enterprise. He's still a cadet.
Yep.
And he doesn't officially become a captain. Like it wasn't weird that he was captain of the Enterprise until they came back and they made him captain of the Enterprise officially. Like that was when it got weird. It was completely normal up until that point that he was captain of the Enterprise.
Was that at the end of the first movie that they did that?
Yes. Yes. Bruce Greenwood's Captain Pike pinned the pips on him.
That's right. You know, Captain Kirk says, "You are relieved, sir," and Bruce Greenwood says, "I am relieved." I do remember that line. Got it. What do you think about the fact that Dahl made his own future come true, the one that he saw in Wesley Crusher's time machine?
You know, I loved that callback when he sat there and he said the thing that he had seen himself saying in Wesley Crusher's machine. And I loved that instead of it being Dal being embarrassed after some terrible mistake he had made, it was just Dal explaining that like what he learned from this whole journey. Like it made it this like wonderful moment of growth for Dal instead of this moment of like, oh, I screwed up so bad.
Was the actual delivery different from what we saw in the machine, or is it just my recollection?
No, I don't think the delivery was notably different. It's just that when we saw it in the machine, we saw Dal's reaction to it, and
Hmm.
um, I think we kind of filled in the emotional context.
So what do you think changed between when he saw that future and he said to somebody else, "It's a future I don't want," to the finale where he accepted it? What changed for him and why?
I think the big thing is that like Dal, like us, was assuming that he's saying this because he screwed up in some way and he failed the mission or he because what do we see in the next couple of episodes, right? Like Dal is convinced that he's like irretrievably a screw up and he needs all those pep talks from Chakotay to sort of pull himself together. Um, whereas this time what he learned is that what he learned was like how hard it is to be um how hard it is to be in charge of a mission and also the importance of backing up the person who is in charge, right? Because um he got to see Gwen like kind of beating herself up over the choice she made to split the party and sort of talk her through that and just realize like, you know, this is really hard and like this job is also really important.
And he also seemed to take orders quite well in the part one Ouroboros. There was a point where she said, "You go to the communications array, I'll hold them back." And Dahl said, "I'm not leaving you behind." And she was like, "The mission comes first." Dahl immediately was like, "You're
Yeah.
right. Let's do this." You know, he doesn't argue with her. He doesn't act rashly and just strike out on his own as a maverick. He takes orders, he falls in line, and he does what the mission calls for.
Yeah, we've been saying since the beginning of the season that we were really hoping for some personal growth for Dal, and here it is.
Yep.
Right? Dal learned a lot, and he's a much better crew member. He's a better friend. He's a better
Mhm.
first officer
Mhm.
than he ever could have been at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I think screwing up on the hull of the Protostar when it was literally a ship and getting that pep talk from Chakotay, and also, as he said in the final episode, realizing that he wasn't the first captain of the Protostar. Like there were those who came before, and there are those who will come after, and it's not all about him. It's about whoever is sitting in that seat serving the mission and going where you're needed. And he takes orders really well. And he saw
Yeah.
how well Gwyn gives them.
I'm proud of him.
Yeah.
I'm proud of him. He's much more enjoyable to watch now.
Yes. And I'll also say that Gwyn looks amazing in that captain's outfit.
Yes, she does. She was born for this.
Oh my gosh.
Literally, right?
No, those colors were made for her. Like, how did we ever see her as anything but a captain?
Hmm.
It's great. Although it does make me think a little bit about the Orville, where the captain and first officer are or used to be a couple.
Yeah.
We didn't really see a lot of romance between Gwyn and Dahl this season, but in the flashback, they showed her at the end of season one, like looking lovingly up at him.
Hmm.
Like there's still some romantic feelings between them, and I wonder if that's going to be weird for them to be captain and first officer.
Or they're just teenagers and they move past it quickly, you know?
Wait, is that what teenagers do? Because when my teenage romances didn't work out, I harbored a grudge. How old am I now? About 30 years.
Yeah, but it wasn't that it didn't work out. They just got busy saving the universe and maybe things just fizzled. Like, you don't know. Maybe they just decided that's not for them right now. Or maybe they're just Riker and Troy forever
Oh, that's
until they
sweet.
retire.
Aw. I have a good friend I met through dating. I'm somebody with a very active life. I do a lot of things, and I need somebody who can appreciate that about me, like not somebody who's going to make a lot of demands on my time. And I found it with her because she was just as busy as I was. So she understood and empathized. And it turned out that we were too busy for each other.
That is sort of the flip side of that.
Yeah, so it didn't work out, but we stayed friends because it's not like we hate each other. We're just like, hey, you know what? We're too busy to be dating each other. Let's just be friends. We're like, all right. And that was like 10, 12 years ago, and we're still friends. So, hey, if it can work for us, maybe it can work for Gwyn and Dahl.
Yeah. I mean, they know a lot more people now too. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Any other comments on this episode?
um, this was a topic of debate in our house.
Oh,
Gwyn sits in the chair.
yes.
Gwyn gives the order for them to pull out and head out on their first mission.
Yeah.
And what's the phrase she says? She says, "Let's reach the stars."
Okay.
Is this her captain catchphrase?
Are you disappointed that she didn't say go fast?
No, I'm just asking because I was like, I've made us like run it back so I could like make sure I had heard her correctly. I'm like, so is this Gwyn's equivalent to go fast, engage, make it so, let's fly?
There was at some point in the last four episodes of Prodigy where to beam down somewhere, it may have even been in Ouroboros Part 1, they said engage. And that's what made them beam down. I've never used engaged. I've never heard that used for transporting.
I think I've heard it used for transporting.
You have? All right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me then. But is this her catchphrase for engaging the warp drive or the protostar drive? Does she say, let's reach for the stars? That's going to get wordy fast. Like,
Not let's reach for the stars, let's reach the stars.
oh, okay. But still, okay, one syllable less.
Right. So, but this is, you see why this is my question, right? It's not as pithy as the other captains. And so is she going to stick with that? Or is that just the thing that she says here because it sounds cool and motivating and she's still like workshopping her catchphrase?
I mean, if "Let's fly" can be Michael Burnham's catchphrase, it's not something she used every time she had to go into warp drive or engage spore jump.
No, but she said it enough times that it was clearly like her thing.
Right. But there are catchphrases that just don't work in the moment. For example, if Dreadnought is coming up on the protostar in his giant ship and they need to engage the proto drive to escape, she's not going to be like, Mr. Pog, reach the stars.
Right.
And Jack of Hog's going to be like, what?
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like it needs to be pithier. But like this is also the moment when you would expect Gwyn's captain catchphrase to be revealed. But I also feel like because I feel like she knows enough about combat situations and the urgency that they require to know that she would need to pick something better.
I
Um,
I'm thinking of it more like the end of, I think it was Star Trek 6, where Sulu asked Kirk, "What's our heading?" And Kirk just said, "Third star to the right, straight on till morning."
Straight on to morning. The Peter Pan reference.
Right.
Yeah,
We never heard that again in any other Star Trek. It was just a pithy line with which to close something.
yeah. That is entirely possible here.
Hmm.
I just wondered like what you thought of that.
I thought it was fine in the moment, and I don't know that we need to hear it again. I hope that we get a chance, though. I don't know if we'll have a third season, but with all these flashbacks, as I said, comparing it to Timeless and to Deep Space Nine, and this felt like a series finale.
I mean, I think it was certainly made to work as a series finale if it needed to, right? Like this story feels very complete. There's clearly more story they can tell, but the story they have been telling is now complete. I hope we get more. I really hope we get more because this was a really great season of Trek. Like this was some good Trek. Um, but you know, all kinds of shows don't get third, fourth seasons. And so we'll
Now,
have to see what happens.
at the beginning of the season, since this was all dropped on July 1st and everybody binged it except you and me, you and I were hearing well in advance some people saying that this was the best season of Trek ever. So now that you and I have caught up to those people, what do we think?
I mean, I think as a cohesive season of Trek, like, because if you think about it, like in the 90s, you didn't really take like a season necessarily together as a single unit. There were too many episodes for that. So I think as if you think of it as if you're taking seasons together, I think front to back, this was possibly one of the most solid seasons of Trek I've ever seen.
Hmm.
Like I think they hit all their marks and did really well. Like any moments where I was like, that's not the choice I would have made were relatively minor compared to the scale of the whole thing. So I would definitely call this like to the extent that we're thinking of Trek in terms of like what's a good season. Like this was a great season of Trek.
If you think about the five Star Trek shows that have aired in the last 7 years, Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, Prodigy. Of those, only Strange New Worlds is not serial. Like, see, there is sometimes something of an arc, but not really. It's more episodic. It's more like classic Trek.
Mhm.
So that leaves Lower Decks, which is also very episodic. Again, a little bit of an arc, but it's a very silly show. Prodigy is serial. Like every episode led right into the next one, just like Picard, just like Discovery. All three of those shows have very high stakes, especially the second season of Prodigy. Like the universe is at risk here. Prodigy is the only one who did it in a way that was fun, in a way. Like everything else was dark and serious at times. And this, in many ways, wasn't. Like the flashback that encapsulated all two seasons had Jankum Pog dancing. Like
Mhm.
they focused on that for like several seconds, and that was from this season. And I thought that was pretty cool. Also, something that set it apart was so Discovery didn't really have cameos from other Star Trek. It clearly exists in canon. It had Spock, but Lower Decks has tons of cameos, but they come and go. Tom Paris, whoop-de-doo. Picard, up until the third season, didn't have any cameos really, and then it had everybody. I feel like Prodigy is the only show that pulls in guest characters from other Star Treks in a way that is not just a cameo and actually plays a vital role in the plot. Like you and I were looking at thumbnails to represent each episode, and I showed you this one thumbnail from episode 18, A Touch of Grey. and it showed all the Prodigy kids sitting at a shuttlecraft with the Doctor from Voyager and Wesley Crusher from TNG. Like that's three different Star Treks there, and all three of those treks were really important to this season of Prodigy.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really cool. We don't really see that very often.
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of things going on there, and but we can't ignore the fact that logistically, it is easier to get these people as voice actors.
True.
And when you're animating them, you aren't worried about does the current state of this person's appearance match the age we're trying to make them be? Like Robert Picardo is no longer in a position to play a hologram, like the holographic doctor from 1990s Voyager. Like he just doesn't look like that anymore. He looks fine. But he's like he can't play an ageless character because Robert Picardo ages. Similarly, like Brent Spiner had this problem playing Data. Like they had to find a way to make Data old so that they could bring Brent Spiner in for the third season because poor guy, like they did him dirty in season 2 of Picard, right? Season 1 of Picard, thank you. By trying to make him look like he had always looked. Like that is an unfair thing to do to a man in his 70s. And so some of it is just like it is much easier for Prodigy to bring these people in because they still sound more or less the same. A little, their voices do age, but not at the rate that our faces do.
Right. Yeah, Prodigy did things that other Star Treks can't because it is animated. But they didn't have to. Like,
Hmm.
this could have been a whole new show with all new characters off doing its own thing. And if they had pulled in other voice actors like Lower Decks does, it could have just been they come and go. Kind of like the Outrageous Akona did in season 1. He was in 2 episodes, didn't play an important part. If you forgot he was there, that's fine because it didn't matter. Kind of like
Yeah.
he showed up in 1 episode of season 2 and he didn't really matter. But Wesley Crusher, like, he was in the flashback
Hmm.
in the middle of the final episode. It's like, I'm Wesley Crusher and I've been waiting for you. Like
Hmm.
that line blew a lot of fans' minds, and it also set the trajectory for the rest of the season,
Hmm.
which the Outrageous Akona could never say.
Sure. Sure. I mean, again, and also logistically with voice actors, it's just easier to get them because they can record their parts from anywhere, right? You don't have to, scheduling is a lot easier with people who are potentially busy. But also, I think something that I really feel strongly about with Prodigy is that because it's the only really like aside from what the animated series associated with the original series, like this is aside from that, this is the first foray Trek has made into children's programming. And I don't want to say they had a chip on their shoulder. I think that's maybe too strong. But I think maybe they had a stronger desire to really assert themselves. And I've used this phrase in this episode already, to assert themselves as part of the canon, right? Like we are not just some weird little offshoot that you can ignore. We aren't like the Star Wars extended universe novels that can just be wiped out of the canon on a whim. Like, no, we are part of this story, and these kids are part of this story because children are also part of the story of the Federation. And I think that was really powerfully demonstrated with all of the input they had from these like beloved other characters, right? That we
Hmm.
had the original Star Trek Prodigy helping these kids out, that we had Janeway and Chakotay and the Doctor. I think those things were really important. And it's interesting because I always felt like Discovery leaned too hard on established canon early on. Like, really, does Michael Burnham have to be Spock's secret sister? Like that always felt kind of like they weren't sure enough of themselves. But I think with this show, I like it. I like that choice better. I think it was that it was a good choice for them to insist on being understood, being understood in relation to the rest of the story. I think that was
Hmm.
good for them.
Yeah, you can't bring in somebody like Admiral Janeway and then have some later show say, "Oh, that wasn't canon. Oh, that was all just a holodeck, whatever." They're not
No.
just going to wipe this away. If, I was telling you recently about how I was talking to somebody who loved Voyager but didn't know about any of the new Star Trek out. And I said, "Oh, did you know there's a new Star Trek out that has Janeway, Chakotay, and the Doctor?" They're like, "What?" Now, actually, I was wrong. This person did know about some new Star Trek because they had seen the first two seasons of Picard because they loved TNG as well. And they said, Ken, I really hated how at the end of season 2 of Picard, they just teased us with Wesley Crusher. He just shows up and then he's gone again. I hated that. And I said, well, you know what a tease does, right? It implies that there's something more where that came from. And that's true in this case. There's more of
Yeah.
Wesley Crusher. That's why he showed up in Picard. They're like, really? I was like, yes, really. There's all the things you love about Star Trek are waiting for you to be discovered in Prodigy. It's all right there.
Yeah.
It's not a kid show. It's not Nickelodeon. It is not just a show called Prodigy. It's Star Trek Prodigy.
Yes. Like, have you didn't get enough Wesley Crusher in Picard season 2? I have great news for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think it worked really well for this show in particular, and I'm really glad they did it this way, that they tied it so closely to the Voyager canon.
Yeah, me too. And I hope that they get a chance to continue doing so because now they have an emergency command hologram, which
Exactly.
we don't know if we'll see Admiral Janeway or Chakotay or the Doctor on Prodigy. But I think these kids have graduated to the point where they can stand on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see Admiral Janeway at least on the incoming message screen, right? Like she's Charlie and they're the angels.
Haha.
So they've got to get their orders from somewhere, right? And they're going to get them from her. So we'll see her in that way. But are we going to see her in action the same way? Maybe not. Chakotay's now the captain of the new Voyager. Like, great. Maybe we'll see him, but he's probably going to be busy doing other things.
Yeah, it's been a great season of Star Trek and a great season of Transporter Lock. I've loved sharing this with you, Tiffany. Thank you so much for being my number one. Is that your role, title, commander?
Yeah, it's my number
Yeah.
one. Yeah, I have had a great time, Ken. I hope we get another season so we get to do this again.
Another season. Well, Transporter Lock will definitely be back. We are going to be reviewing the third season of Strange New Worlds, which starts next year, and the fifth and final season of Lower Decks, which starts October 24th. The structure of Transporter Lock is that it'll be me with a different host for each show of Star Trek. So if there's a third season of Prodigy, Tiffany, it'll be you and me if you're up for it.
Oh yeah, I'll be
Excellent.
totally up for it.
I'm thrilled to hear that. This is not something, by the way, listeners, that we had discussed beforehand. So you could have just as easily shot me down in front of all dozens of our listeners. So, Uh, but if there isn't another season of, hold on, if there is not another season of Star Trek Prodigy, then this might be our ultimate episode.
I'm just taking a moment to like let that sink in.
Yeah, yeah.
Do we need a montage of our greatest moments
Should we do a flashback?
with like a stirring soundtrack?
I mean, I could just drop the last 10 episodes of this podcast, played at 5,000 speed, crush it into like 5 seconds.
Somebody call Michael Giacchino.
Call who now? What?
Michael Giacchino. He did the theme
Oh,
for Prodigy.
is that how you pronounce his name?
Yep.
See, I looked up how to pronounce Ouroboros. I did not look up how to pronounce the composer's name. Thank you. So, Tiffany, where can listeners find you online?
You can find me at my website, tiff.is.
tiff.is.
Yes.
Fantastic. And of course, all episodes of this show can be found at Transporter Lock, which will now be taking a 2-month hiatus. And then we'll be back to review Lower Decks. Until then,
Let's reach the stars.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter @TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com.
Like, oh, that's terrible. That's not pithy at all.